Welcome to everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Ben Gilmartin. I'm the president of AIA New York this year. It's a pleasure to have you all join us tonight, and we expect a really engaging conversation. I'd like to thank the co-chairs, Abby Suckle and Stephen Johnson, and the members of the Architectural Dialogues Committee for making this event such a success. I want to put in a few plugs, and then I'll hand over to Abby. Of course, always check out the AIA website. We have exciting exhibitions, competitions, events coming up and currently on view. I want to highlight one thing in particular, which is on the Center for Architecture side. We have the annual Guess a Sketch coming up. That event's really fun, and that's coming up on March 13th. We'll bring together architects, architectural enthusiasts, and young professionals for a fun-filled evening of competition and networking. So if you're interested in Guess a Sketch, for more information about the event, it's available on the Center for Architecture website. So thanks to you all again for coming out tonight in real life. It's great to have you all here. I think it's going to be super fun, especially when everyone gets a little bit loosened up. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Abby to introduce the speaker and moderator of the event tonight.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, hi, you can hear me, right? Okay, that's good. I'm Abby Suckle, co-chair of the Architecture Dialogue Committee. On September 12th, 2001, I called up the AIA and asked everybody what were we doing about the World Trade Center. And of course, nobody knew, but we had a meeting at FX Fowle's office then because we didn't have a Center for Architecture. And we started to figure out, it was probably the first time architects in New York actually said, do we have any power and how can we change our city? I remember what struck me is Marilyn Jordan Taylor, who at the time was the principal at SOM, saying, gee, I wonder if they'll return my call if I call somebody who's important downtown, you know, some of the big players downtown. And shockingly, they did. And so that launched New York New Visions, Imagine New York, and a whole lot of design exercises about how do we replan our city, and worse, more interestingly, how do we shape the conversation, and how do we get communities involved, as well as the design community, as well as the people. So eventually, about 10 years later, of course, that also, Culture Now was actually the Cultural and Historical Committee of New York New Visions, and it turned out when we printed our map, the Architecture League and the AIA wanted the copyright, and the only solution was for lawyers for the arts to make Culture Now into a 501c3, so we did that. About 10 years later, Sandy happened. Now, before Sandy, we had done, and I was vice president of outreach, and we had done at the, with MoMA, they had an exhibition called Rising Currents, and they'd had half a dozen collaborations, and it was all at PS1, and they were going to imagine what we would do if there were sea level rise in Palisade Bay, which of course was felt to be a few feet eventually, and in inches. It wouldn't hit us right away, and then suddenly there was Sandy, and then we had to recalibrate all over again, redo building codes, write reports, think about things. And essentially last week, of course, with the LA fires, we reached out to Carlo, who's Carlo Cacavella is actually the Jesse Lazar of Los Angeles, and said, Carlo, you know, now that you're getting organized, Carlos, what could we do? And they had their first meeting last night, which was all about, you know, how to short-term, who needs an office, who needs a place to live, all that sort of stuff. But it's the beginning of organization and getting people to start to think about how to replan. So what we thought we would do is kind of have a, you know, how do you, since we're sort of the design committee, what happens when you get whacked and you have to change everything, keep the design intent, work with the city as it is, work with what do we want to be, how do we want to live, and how do we recalibrate. And we will be having with them a series of thinking discussions with the people, some of the architects who are our colleagues in Los Angeles. Nothing is really organized, but if you want to participate in those through our Architecture Dialogue Committee, we'd be more than happy to include you in the list and figure out how we should be shaping cities of the future, because we come with all this expertise that we've unfortunately had to live with, none of which has to do with fires. And but it's really the same problem, you know, how to use design as a tool for the future. We will be having a major event called It Happened Here, which is actually a kind of the first kickoff event for America 250, as well as the 400th anniversary of New York, which is this year, and we'll be doing it July 4th weekend. The last day we will do, every day will be a century. The last, and it'll be focused in Lower Manhattan, because that's historically where a lot of things happen. But essentially the last day we'll talk about New York as a global city. How do we face the future? And then as we go, we've been working with Harvard actually to figure out what cities we would do, but we would go around the globe and talk about the different ways cities are attacking water, mobility, but in a good way, so that we can learn from each other and shape the future. If you would like to be involved and collaborate on how we actually set these things up, please let us know. There are 3 committees from the AIA working on it: Planning and Urban Design, Global Dialogue, as well as our committee, Architecture. So I thought that this would be a really good opportunity because of LA. Now, I also mention LA because my friend Kai happens to be an alumni of UCLA and probably spent a good deal of time on Sunset Boulevard, possibly some in the Palisades. I did a building there, which took forever because no one could make a decision, so I have spent a lot of time out there too, so we could talk. So I thought this was appropriate. Also, Kai did the Big U project here, which again is a whole discussion about where do you face the future. Thankfully, he asked Diana to join him tonight. Diana was married to a very wonderful man named Bill Menking, who started with us in the beginning, kind of helping us shape Cocktails and Conversations, as well as the some of the projects. He's died some years ago, but he was one of our first pairings. And I think it's fitting. I remember when we had long discussions, he said to me, you know, you've got to meet my wife. She is really amazing. And it's true. He set us up, and we're still friends. So there you go. So I thought this is great because I get, you know, it's kind of a good blend for us. Now, the next people who have to join us are Toby and David, and they're on cocktail number 80, which actually is not this, or 78 or something like that, which is a new creation, if you can imagine, in the spirit of Kai. So with that, I'm going to send the microphone to Toby and David so that they can talk.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? There was no...
Can you hear both of us?
Can you hear both of us?
Can you hear it back?
Fantastic.
Hi.
Hi. I'm David Moo.
I'm Toby Cicchini. We are your resident bartenders once every blue moon. I'm going to start off by striking what Abby said. She counts in dog years, these things. I don't think we're even remotely on 80 here. And we are also not making a new cocktail for you. For one of the first times ever.
We are making something that we have never made for this event in these 65 or whatever it is iterations that we've done here. But it is not a new cocktail. It is a very old cocktail.
But the way we got to this, I don't even know if we can go into this like internecine story. So what we do, as many of you know, is that we are tasked with the ridiculous job of inventing, or pairing a cocktail with sort of the trajectory of an architect's career / vision / tastes, which is an absurdity.
And personal history. Tastes, and personal history.
And so every time we do this, it's absurd. With Kai-Uwe, it was maybe even more difficult because we were, I was trying to retrace just over the past couple of days. I'm like, wait, how do we talk about this cocktail? Wait, how did we get to what we did? Like, oh wait, we made like 8 different drinks, and we came from the Big U project and like.
Also, some things that he had said about what he likes to drink and some things about his personal history, most of which is not represented in this cocktail. There was indeed a story about a very famous ocean liner, which thankfully does not include Leonardo DiCaprio or some famous jewels. But we did, in fact, eventually, having synthesized all of that, arrive at something.
Yeah, this is not elucidating anything for you except to say that we go through insane backflips and absolutely superfluous nerdism to make these drinks, and this really is just going to look like coasting. So because what we came up with tonight for you is groundbreaking. It's a bramble. How many people know what a bramble is?
Anybody?
Almost no one. I love that. So we made up this drink. No, we didn't. So, yeah, this is clearly a group of Americans. So the bramble, the bramble is an extremely famous cocktail in Britain. It was invented in the 90s.
No, in 1984.
No,
Yes.
there's no way.
I looked it
He
up,
did
man.
not invent the bramble before
1984.
That's a lie.
Yes, the
That's
bramble.
totally
The
a
bramble
lie.
is to Britain as the cosmopolitan is to. Sorry.
I dispute that date, but it was made up by a British, a London bartender named Dick Bradsell, who actually I knew, who died, but who was an extremely gifted bartender, an extremely profane man, a really funny guy.
Those might go hand in hand.
And who would be super amused right now that a much lesser drink that he made up sort of off the cuff, which he called the espresso vodka or vodka espresso, is now having this wild heyday as the
Oh.
espresso martini.
Oh my God! It's only at this moment that I realized we did it. We put the espresso martini into this event, which was in fact part of the brief.
That's a strange inside joke between Avi and Kai. So Dick Bradsell invented the bramble at a club called Fred's Club in Soho, and this became like the drink throughout the 90s and aughts in Britain. It was just incredibly popular. What it is effectively is a sharp gin sour that then has floated atop it a liqueur, a blackberry liqueur called crème de mûre. And as such, it's a decent sort of summertime tipple. I have always preferred making it with half and half crème de mûre and crème de framboise, which is a raspberry liqueur as well. And I told Dick that once, and he was like, I mean, any way you want to F it up. But he was kind of all right with it, so I've always made mine that way. We came to this through a very strange set of, how do we do this? We were making different drinks, and we were trying something with lingonberry.
I had
and
suggested that we do this thing that we like. We once made a New York sour for this event, and I was like, oh, well, Kai really likes gin, and we were talking about his taste in wine as well, and just for some reason it popped into my head that we would do a white New York sour. So instead of using whiskey, we would use gin, and instead of using red wine, we would use white wine. We tried this. It was actually delicious, but boring to look at. So that was one. And then at the same time, Toby had suggested that maybe we should do a bramble, but that it should be with lingonberry in order to sort of make a vague reference to Kai's Germanic roots. And
so we made that.
we made that. It was also.
And we were trying to do it with something on the bottom. We did a very heavy New York sour with a Moscato d'Asti syrup that we put on the bottom, and it was kind of remarkable how we kept it on the bottom.
And it was delicious.
But you couldn't see it, and it was delicious. But like we're getting all off track. So I was like, effectively, we're just making a bramble here. Let's just try a bramble. And the lingonberry turned out to be sort of inferior to the actual bramble, and we're like, okay, so how can we reverse engineer a bramble so that rather than floating it on top, we're actually sinking the crème de mûre framboise mix to the bottom and having like this very delineated line, having to do sort of intellectually with the Big U project.
So we're thinking that like Well, it's true. The Big U project is largely about water control and separation of different water zones, and so we're creating a drink in which there is a very clear separation between these two liquid strata. And so there you go. That is how we have arrived at this thing, which we're calling the Big Bergmann Bradsell Bramble. And with that,
Bradsell
Toby,
being Dick Bradsell.
take it
Okay,
away.
so this is going to be constructed in a way very unlike other drinks. You've seen me shaking cocktails up here and talking about how some things are stirred when they have clear elements to them, like vermouth and spices and whiskey and whatnot. Things that you have that are cloudy, like citrus juices and creams and whatnot, you shake those. We're throwing that out the window for this. Because we wanted to have the stratification that we wanted to have. And I'm not shaking this drink at all. In fact, you are going to shake it. Let me, while I'm putting this together, iterate this once and then reiterate it at the end. We're building this drink so that the sweetening element is at the bottom of the drink because it's pretty and it's arresting and it suits our intellectual purpose. If you drink it like that, through the straw that we're providing for you to stir with, you're going to get a big mouthful of sweet. And you're going to say, oh, what happened there? And if you're not listening to me now and you simply take a sip off the top, you're going to get punched in the gob by an extremely shrill gin sour that hasn't been mixed yet. So look at it, say, oh, that's pretty, and then mix it up, all right? So this is crème de mûre, this is crème de framboise, this is simple syrup. There's a bit of each in it. In fact, a 1/4 ounce of each of them. And so I've mixed them all into one thing here for our purposes. And I'm going to put, hence, 3/4 of an ounce into each of these glasses in the bottom, where it will remain. I said this already. I'm going to say it again. But somebody's still going to mess it up. And then it's simply 2 parts of gin to 3/4 of a part of lemon juice. So I'm going to do this twice and mix these together. This is absolutely not how drinks are made. Let me reiterate. Don't try this at home, but do try it here. And so I'm simply going to float that on the top of this. Once I beat this down a little bit, behave. And that's going to just sit there because of the relative, yeah, it is. Because of the relative weights of these different liquids, not unlike what we have in the southern tip of Manhattan. I won't labor that point. That's for you guys to labor. All right. So not only those go into each other for a moment and then they separate out, which is an especially keen trick. Not that I invented that, but I noticed it. This seems overly simple on my part and like I'm coasting. Well, that's because I am. That's you guys. Take it over. We'll have them out for everybody shortly. Wait, what are we doing here when we get our drink? Stir. That's right. Mix it up. Thank you.
You guys are getting these, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Takes a minute to do.
Okay, we stir.
We stir.
So just make sure that when we speak into the microphone.
Yes, we will. We will.
Gotta have a drink first.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Cheers.
cheers. Very good. Okay.
This is amazing. All right. Let's get started. I think they're on.
They are on. Okay. So this is my first time to do this after how many? 65 of these. I was so moved when you sent the email and asked me to do this moderation, so I'm very happy to be here. Because they don't often associate me on the editorial track, and these are all editors that do this. So, but I do get very involved with editorial at the Architect's newspaper and other things. So I thought what I would do is, I've known Kai a long time, and I think the first place I met him was at your party in 2006 when you guys launched your firm here in New York. But I put together top 10 words that I think about when I think of you. German, lift, a beat, everywhere at once. I look at your social media, and you're always someplace. You're very connected. You're a dad, you're a husband, you're a son. I don't know if you're a brother. Big, responsive, football, sports, and fun. I met Kai, I don't even remember meeting him, but I remember going to this party at the Stair at Lehigh, which was where your first office was, and I rode up in the elevator with the King and Queen of Denmark. So I was very impressed about going to this party and who these people were. I also, we were somewhat involved in MIPIM, meaning Bill Min King and the Architect's newspaper, and I know that Kai's been very involved with MIPIM, so that always seems to come up.
And the Biennale.
And
I met Bill at the Biennale the first time.
at the Biennale.
Yeah.
When he was involved, or?
He was just up on a roof drinking.
Were you at that party?
Yeah,
So,
I'm all everywhere at once. I will. This is just an intro.
This is an
Yeah,
intro.
yeah.
So we already discussed this is how we were going to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
this. And then the third thing, I meet Kai somewhere around 4 or 5 times a year, and we always have a nice conversation, and I always felt very connected to you. So I'm very happy to be here having this conversation.
Amazing. 2012 was when we had the party. You said 2006.
Oh, it was
So
12,
just
okay.
to, we arrived to New York in 2010, and we were actually working out of Joshua Ramos's Rex office for the first kind of year, and then we kind of migrated to the Stair at Lehigh building in Chelsea. So I will actually start with, if you can flip the slides. Is that something that you do or I do up here? Perfect. So just have broken a little bit of a kind of a life journey on how we're sitting here to give you a little bit of a parameter also for our conversation. So I'm going to actually flip around and look at this as well.
Okay.
So this is origins. And since we're drinking, I have broken up my life into a series of drinks or a series of tastes that accompany my life where I've been. And please don't think that I'm drinking as a child. These are drinks that I enjoy now from those places as an adult. But I was born in a town called Einbeck, and it is famous for having one of the oldest breweries from 1364. And it has this Urbock, or Bock beer. And the old Bock beer is one of the strongest beers. The Bock is actually a derivation from Einbeck. So this strong kind of beer originated in Einbeck. Einbeck is a tiny little hamlet, less than 20,000 people, in a kind of medieval town that's surrounded by pastures. So you can still see the moat around. Most of the buildings in the town date from between 13 and 1400, with probably a few newer buildings in between. This is the city hall. But what you'll notice is that it's all timber frame buildings, and they have been continuously inhabited for hundreds of years. That's the downtown, and you can't tell what and how these buildings are being used. They're offices, they're hospitals in these buildings, they're, of course, homes. They have wonderful wood carvings. I show this because in many ways, there's the famous boat. So in many ways, these timber frame houses, because we're also like talking about timber frame a lot right now, but these timber frame houses have an incredible elasticity. There's not a single right angle in my entire town. They are all wonky. And the doorways are all wonky as well. So you can see and sense how you could build something, literally build something 13 to 1400 and actually still have those same buildings occupied, heated, cooled to today. So it's a sense of sustainability as well of how to actually build something with longevity. This is in Germany. Yeah. So as a 7-year-old, sorry, my father was headhunted. He was a textile engineer, and he was headhunted. This was 1976, so the EPA had just passed a law, the whole environmental movement, and there was a kind of desire to bring over European textile engineers that understood filtration. It's a long story, but anyways, he gets headhunted to come, and we moved to Georgia. But my family thought it was a good idea to come across on the Queen Elizabeth II ocean liner one way. And so my first vision of America as a 7-year-old was coming into the harbor of New York with the Statue of Liberty. And I still remember that. We docked at Chelsea Piers. That was still a working Cunard. It was a Cunard line. So actually, you could refer or make reference to Leonardo as well. And then from New York, we made a beeline down to Georgia, where you can get the peach fuzz cocktail, a refreshing blend of ice, peaches, pink lemonade, and vodka. And I moved to another small hamlet, this time about 26,000 people, called LaGrange, Georgia, which is a textile town. And it's famous for like Milliken carpets. But this is a town that has a square that you can see right there in the center. That is a really nice, wonderful kind of organization. It's based on kind of the Savannah squares, and everything radiates from that little square. Needless to say, this is also something that was kind of remarkable when we came to America. My dad worked for a company that had recruited him and brought the entire family. We all received green cards in the 70s immediately. There was not even a wait at that time. And about maybe 6 months into the employment, the OPEC oil crisis, the first one, happened, and the company decided to change course. They laid off a bunch of people, including my father, who had just brought the entire family over. So instead of hightailing it back to Germany, he decided to do what you can do here, which is to start his own company. And so that kind of, dream of doing something, and so he just set off and became a kind of environmental consultant, and would work with the companies to kind of clean up their production through filtration. So this is a period of, high school. What do? I mean, you kind of express yourself through music. So here's just a few of the kind of, I have that sort of European craft work, Tangerine Dream, but then I'm growing up in Georgia, so you got REM, Life's Great Pageant, Swan Swan Hummingbird, Hurrah, Joy Division, New Order, these in Bauhaus, and these are the kind of impressions that I had at that time. So now I'm actually moving to my first university, which is Virginia. So this is a mint julep, boozy bourbon, simple syrup, crushed ice, and fresh mint. And for those of you who know, it's an incredible campus, University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Thomas Jefferson, a self-trained, taught architect beyond being a statesman and a farmer. So he built a university and it was the first university that was not denominational or tied to a religious institution. So it was a public university, and it was to basically, in order to have a democracy, a working democracy, you needed an educated voting population. So I was very inspired by the kind of holistic thinking of Thomas Jefferson, the incredible interests that he had throughout his life. So that's where I would say that I started to take a lot of courses outside of architecture. So I actually went to school to train as an architect, but I learned a lot. So while there, I read a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I got this crazy idea and convinced my friend who had just purchased a VW bus that I was going to UCLA for graduate school, and that he would basically drive me to across the country to get me to school. So we piled in, and we drove 15,000 miles. That's not a beeline. That's about as circuitous of a path that you could take. We took 3 months, and we drew this map of America on the side of the van. We basically slept in the van the whole time. And then we mapped out our trip, and it's kind of a funny idea, but we decided to do a W across the country, all the way up to Seattle, and then from Seattle I took a train back down to LA, and then he would do a V back. So at the end of the trip, he did a VW across the US. That was the concept. So we picked up hitchhikers. This is a Czech guy who was in the Philharmonic, and Czech had just been freed or from communism, and so the first thing he decided to do as a violinist in the Philharmonic was to come to America. He'd seen Wizard of Oz, so he thought that everything was in Kansas, and then he learned it wasn't. He picked up weird things like a tie-dye shirt from a Dead concert. He had leather sandals from Tijuana and an Arizona University shorts. And we just picked him up. He was absolutely great. And then, of course, there's a lot of Zen in the art in a VW bus. So it broke down a ton, and learning how to sort of build that back together and get us all the way across was a lot of fun. We're now in Los Angeles. So this is the Jarritos Tamarind Soda, Fresh Lemon Juice, and Tequila Blanco Margarita. So I was in LA, as had been mentioned by Abby earlier, in the early 90s, so 91 to 93. I managed to hit wildfires at that point. The riots were happening, mudslides, and I did miss the Northridge quake, but I did a lot of the four ecologies of Los Angeles, and then The Ecology of Fear. These are books that made quite an impression upon me as I was living there. And I took Edward Soja's postmodern geography class, which also is an incredible planning kind of perspective. So, UCLA with UVA are kind of two public universities that offer just an incredible education. This is my final thesis. Eric Owen Moss, Michael Rotundi, and a couple of others were there to kind of defend the LA style of working at that time. And what I learned after being in university for 6 years was that I had kind of learned a bookish way of thinking. We had been only in dark rooms looking at slides of other places. So I decided that I would go auf der Walz, which is kind of an idea of journeyman or apprenticing, and that I would go places that I had seen throughout these 6 years, and I wanted to experience. I wanted to get my hands dirty and work. So this was also inspired through the readings of Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund. These are two brothers who, one is a journeyman and the other is a monk. One is in a monastery, doesn't go anywhere, but he is going traveling in his mind. The other one is traveling geographically but he's also not satisfied. And so then the two brothers kind of meet at the end again, and they kind of realize that they both have parts of a full life, and that's the teaching, is that you need a little bit of everything. So this idea of journeyman is intrinsic in, it's still a practice where carpenters, also architects, train themselves by doing and making, and they commit to being on the road for anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 years. So I went for 2 years to Germany, Mali, Switzerland, Italy, Russia, Lithuania, and Sweden. I didn't have a plan. I just would go someplace, I'd work for 3 or 4 months, make a little bit of money, and then go to the next place. So I did Adobe work in Mali, kind of a lot of rebuilding. I did survey work with Robert Mangurian and Marianne Ray in Hadrian's Villa. I worked with granite for a sculptor in Lithuania. And then I ended up doing the thing that I thought was the coolest, which was blowing glass in the Orrefors School of Sweden. And it was that last bit that I did which allowed me to sort of get my hands into the glass making, both blowing and then also later casting. This is at the Pilchuck Glass School. So this was about 5 to 6 years, because it was the last thing I did in the apprenticeships. And then I decided to, it was a National Geographic from 1993 that had been a story of Dale Chihuly in Seattle as the greatest kind of glass personality. And so when I decided that my apprenticeships were up, I was out of money and I needed to go back home, I decided to move to Seattle. So I just got a one-way ticket and I showed up. And then I had this affinity to continue the learnings that I had in Orrefors, so ended up at the Pilchuck Glass School. But I didn't work with glass for one of these semesters. I worked with ice. So that's a bunch of ice melting in there, and got to work with Paul Marioni, another artist that is pretty incredible. But moving to Seattle, where craft beer is like essential, with caramel, maltiness, hops, gypsum, that worries me, Irish moss, and yeast, I met this guy. And we hit it off. It was, I think, a word that I said during the interview. It was a 4-hour interview. And he literally was taking me to different meetings that he was a part of, always asking me my opinion. And in that process, he could tell kind of like how I would react. But he asked one question specifically, and he said, "What's the most important trait that you could have?" And then I said, "Curiosity." And then he just said, "I like that." And then it would almost seem that that was kind of a change in the conversation from it's an interview to let me talk to you about what you're going to do on Monday. And then I ended up helping out in the hot shop from time to time. And then he was moving from I would say, gallery scale to a architectural scale. And he needed architects to help him kind of move into that larger scale. So one of my first jobs was to actually create this structure in Venice that could be across the canals, and then the glass could be hung from armatures over it. So just trying to figure out all of those different things. This is the end of the day chandelier, because it's made of all the parts that were left over of the other ones. And then this is in Jerusalem, another kind of rounded piece where we figured out the different kind of attachments for the glass. Iceland, going and into the Blue Lagoon and putting things up there. So this was a point where I had now done a good total of about 6 years of apprenticing, working with different materials. And I'd come to a point where I was deciding, do I do that? Or am I an architect still? And so I decided to take a year to travel and decide how I wanted to re-engage with architecture. So I ended up in places like Timbuktu in West Africa, This is in Turkey, where it snowed in April. This is Syria, Damascus, a 1930s Citroën. Jerusalem in April, got a snow day. I think it was the day before Easter in 1998. You can check the weather report. This is Amritsar, the temple for the Sikhs. Kathmandu, Vietnam. That's how I got around, was a lot of buses. Laos. And this trip going around the world gave me both perspective, and it gave me a kind of reinvigoration to then devote myself fully to architecture. So when I came back to Seattle, I ended up working with Ed Weinstein there in the center with the baseball hat, and Lee Copeland over here, second from the right. They have a small office, regional, but very modern. And I lucked into this opportunity, which is, I was about 26 or 20, no, by this time I was 28, 29. So as a 29-year-old, I started my career as an architect. And I was I would say, a kind of designer level person. Julie Krieg, who's next to me right there, she was the project leader. She decided to leave when the construction started of a 1,000-person synagogue in Bellevue, Washington. And I was the only other person that had been on the job for the previous year and a half. So I ended up taking over the CA work, even though I didn't really know enough about architecture. I had known about all of these different crafts and materials. So I was able to communicate with all of the masons, with the glass installers. So I actually did find myself being able to use what I had learned. And then the other thing I had the chance to do was to now utilize my experiences in wood, steel, and glass to create what I think is one of the most modern Torahs and arcs around. So that's a glass arc. The Torahs are placed there in the glass cabinets, and then you have a bima that is a wooden carved piece that actually goes up and down. And then the beauty, I like the rabbi. The rabbi says with the glass commandments, certain ones are lit up because the sun shines on them. He goes, you only have to do the ones that are lit up to the congregation. So kind of nice. It was reform, yes. So I then worked in Seattle for 3 years. I decided I had a German passport. I could work in Europe. So I hightailed it over to Europe, and I worked for Baumschlager and Eberle, two guys in Austria who build an incredible amount of projects. And I worked for 2.5 years for them. On this project, it's the UN AIDS headquarters in Geneva. So then I go on a trip to the Biennale. This is now 2004. And I think it was either that one or 2006 that I met Bill.
2008.
8.
Was when he did the Biennale.
Okay,
When we did that, yeah.
so 2008. But on this one is where I met this guy. I met both Bjarke and Julien. They were, at that time, 4 years into plot, and they won the Golden Lion for the Stavanger Concert House. And they were, I think, the ripe age of 29 or 30 at that time. So I was intrigued that someone in my generation was actually perceived as doing work that was at that quality or that level. So I had the idea of actually moving from Austria to Scandinavia, and I said, I'll look you up when I go up there. And I remember Bjarke just saying, can't wait till you get to Copenhagen. So that led to the trip and the move to both Denmark and then, of course, here to Manhattan. which is here a dry Manhattan of bourbon, dry vermouth, and Angostura bitters. So that is this crew. It is an incredible collective group of people. Big has been, it's offered so many different opportunities. I'll just show you a few of the things. This is Super Keelan Park, which is in Copenhagen, one of my first projects. It's a sammelsurium of 100 different objects that people have sourced from their own countries and brought to Denmark. The Smithsonian, so I work relatively on a lot of the larger master planning kind of projects. The maze at the National Building Museum. I am the stamping architect on East 126th in Harlem. And then, of course, this has already been referenced. The Big U has been the last 12 years. I've been working on that, and it's now the first phase of 2.5 miles is under construction and will be delivered in 26. So that is the first part right there. And this image, I think, is also pretty amazing in that during COVID, Van Allen ran an ideas competition for the Brooklyn Bridge. And one of the things was when the Brooklyn Bridge was opened, 400,000 people traversed it every single day. Today, 160,000 people use it because it is clogged with traffic. So when it opened, it had public transportation taking you. It had also automobiles, and it allowed for people moving around on the boardwalk. So we were trying to look for ways of bringing that number back up, and we were giving more of it back to the pedestrian. We have autonomous lanes for autonomous vehicles moving between downtown Brooklyn and Financial District. And then we have basically supersized bike lanes going in both directions. The incredible thing, this is the project that has actually moved the fastest of all of our New York work. We put this out during COVID. The mayor, de Blasio, and the interim transportation commissioner, Hank Gutman, saw this, and then he was the one who moved the bike lanes from the pedestrian and created the bike lane down on the street level. So I do feel like that is, in many ways, a huge development from that.
I had no idea that happened.
Yeah.
I crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, and I was like, I didn't even realize that. I hated being on the Brooklyn Bridge because you always thought you were going to get killed.
Yes.
From the bikes.
Yes. So that it makes it safer. We've also shown a vision, and we're working right now with a bunch of folks to look at the BQE and the triple decker. I know it's a Gordian knot. And then we have River Ring. So this is just being able to sort of work around the East River. It's also being able to work in different boroughs. We just completed the NYPD 40th precinct in the Bronx, and that's, in some ways it looks almost like a kind of a museum. It has a civic room that the people can actually lease out and use. It brings daylight into every room. It has green roofs. It's pretty remarkable. And then it's one of the best projects that I'm a part of is the culture at Big and the office as a whole. So we do these study trips. This is the last one we took, where we took the whole office to Burning Man, and we worked on the orb. So 250 Bigsters came to Burning Man. Switzerland, Japan, and China above that. So I kind of am the curator of those trips, and am looking forward to the next one. I also work on the exhibitions along with Bjarke and a couple of others. So we have Yes is More, the Hot to Cold one, Form Giving, and this is a peek view of our next big exhibition about materials. So you all know those exhibitions and books. We are now working on 10 issues of Domus, and the first one just came out. And then it's the crew. This is my team working at Big, so they're lifting me, but typically I lift people. So it's something that happens when I start drinking. And let's see what happens tonight. But this is just and the cool thing, I don't know if you guys use Skallgruber, but this is where you get people. He's like pre-cut all the people, and you don't have to pay for them. Take a look at that one right there. That's a lifting figure that you can put into all of your renderings now. So, and then to sort of finish off, this is the next generation of lifters. This is Amelie and Lucas, and yeah, that's what I'm gonna basically end on, is a Finnish gin tonic, cranberry and rosemary, to make the best gin and tonic in the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Kai. That's a lot to unpack. Is this on?
Yeah, it is.
It is on? Okay. It's a lot to unpack. And one of the things I find fascinating about you is you have kind of a split brain where you can not only do design, but you think about business. And I'm all about business, but I also like to think about design. I think I love spreadsheets, so I'm not sure if you like spreadsheets. You probably don't look at spreadsheets, but
I think creativity is a spreadsheet. I think creativity is in a contract. I think creativity is in a submittal. It's in all of those places. A specification that you can do as much in those vehicles as you can in a drawing.
great, love that. I always start with a spreadsheet. I have an idea, and I'm like, oh my God, I get to make a spreadsheet and figure this out and put some numbers together. So that's fascinating. I wanted to ask, what kind of person do you believe? To what?
I think you have to do it really close to your.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
We were told by the bartenders to yell into the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of person do you believe it takes to be in your position of business development on a global scale? Is this something that's innate, or is it learned?
Well, let me put it this way, because I think there are a lot of offices, especially in America, that develop in a very sort of, let's say, corporate culture or corporate way. And I would say that business development is oftentimes called marketing, and that marketing departments are quite often not architects. So you're having people represent you that really they know a lot about graphics, they know a lot about copy editing, and they're very good at what they do. But if you are trying to communicate what it is that everyone else is doing in the office, then a marketing department, which is again something I don't use the terminology because I don't market. I in a way I communicate the essence or what we're doing, and to me that's storytelling. So that is something in Big's culture is with people who have done those things before. So if you look at the team that I have, everybody has had some form or facet of design, whether it's landscape architecture or planning or been architecture, have been designers also like myself, and then have just decided to go into the business side of things.
And they like communicating and being out there and having drinks and cocktails and going to lots of events.
I think that's, whether you're social or not social, that's dependent on you. I remember, and maybe this is where it all started, at UCLA, the architecture school is called Perloff Hall. And it was directly opposite of the business school called Anderson. And I remember being there in the first few months, and we had a beer vending machine in the studio that we had to pay for. I think it was a quarter or 50 cents for a beer. And it was always the third years that were making the money off of all the others that were buying the beer. But they were also responsible for stocking it. I say this because I looked over at the business school, and they would have keggers on their rooftop, and they were sponsored by companies. And I went over there, and I was like, how many kegs do you have? And he's like, 3, 4, 5. What? And you don't pay for it? No, they just bring the kegs. And then I just decided then and there that I wanted to learn as much about the business school, and I was taking classes both officially and unofficially, in addition to the architecture classes, because I wanted to learn how they were thinking. How did they get to that point where they knew that there was someone? And it's the same in architecture. You can, if you really try, you can find those same relationships.
Like, what do you mean?
I mean,
They all want to know the secret.
uh,
They're here to hear the secret
I mean,
of how this happens.
secret is authenticity. So if you're authentic and if you are, you believe in what you do and you communicate that, that should be enough. Yep. I don't know.
I think you have to be out there on a global scale.
Yeah.
Which you have been for a very long time.
Yep.
And you go to places that I think other people don't. The whole thing about MIPIM. Do you want to talk about MIPIM? Does everyone know what MIPIM is?
Yeah, so MIPIM is a real estate conference that you would probably say is about the most evil people in blue suits that you can imagine talking about wheeling and dealing. It's kind of if Real Deal had, a club and like a Club Med meets
Happens in
the Real
Cannes,
Deal.
right?
Happens in Cannes, same place as the film festival, and between 30 and 40,000 folks come,
Real estate folks.
and it's for 3 days, very intense days. So when we first went, which now is probably 20 years ago, there was not a single architect. I would say it was...
Or Americans.
Yeah. And it was an ecosystem, which I realized when we get a phone call as an architect, there probably has been about 4 to 5 years of work done in getting the site and figuring out what is possible on the site and dealing with all the deeds and whatever. And all of that prep work is done by a bunch of zoning consultants and other people. There's also banks that are invited. So we get a call halfway into the life cycle of a project. We tend to think it's the beginning, but I learned to respect that first half. And I think it's helpful when you, as an architect, also can talk that kind of talk. A lot, you get a lot of respect and also from the financiers. So MIPIM is a place where there's...
Deals happen.
Well, yeah, there's the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Azerbaijan. There are 3 guys. They have a suitcase. It's $2 billion, and they have to put it on projects, real estate projects, within the next 3 days.
So it's like Shark Tank. Maybe.
It's a little bit of everything, and
So you're still going there.
yeah.
Are there other Americans coming to the place?
Yes, there are folks that are a handful. Yeah.
So that's part of the secret sauce.
Yeah.
That you figured out. So Bill tried to create an American contingent. I think this was about 2012. And he couldn't really get anything off the ground. We were going to have an American pavilion, and all these people were going to buy into it and show what America was doing, but also have investment coming from around the world to these projects.
You do have Americans now there. They are real estate brokers from Florida selling swampland. I know there are now also architects from America, but
Because that's where they're getting the jobs
yeah,
and connecting to these people with money.
yeah. I would say don't go your first year and thinking that you're going to come back with something. It is something where you show up,
Yeah.
and after
Make
4 or
relationships.
5 years, they see you, then they trust you a little bit more, and then it could actually turn into those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next question. I'm not going to ask that. So I know that there's some new things you guys are working on. I don't know, how much time do we have? But I want to get audience questions in
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you want to talk about these latest things that are happening down in Texas, Icon, space?
Icon is interesting, and I was actually, when Abby was mentioning right at the beginning about the ties to LA and wanting to, support and help, it is, it's crushing to see and to even consider what it means to lose so much. We've been working with Icon, which is a 3D print company out of Austin now for 5-6 years. And 2 years ago, they had us working on 2 kind of research projects. One is called the Firehouse, and the other one is called the Flood House. And you can imagine what I'm about to say is that they are developing a standalone single-family dwelling that basically is built out of non-combustible materials. And so it's fire retardant, or fire resistant, you can say. It's of course not fireproof. But what's interesting is that their approach was to do this research and then to reach out to insurance companies. Because they're basically saying that the insurers actually would be interested in knowing that this product or these kinds of opportunities actually exist, and they can actually be produced at a lower cost than stick frame building. So we did a neighborhood of 100 3D printed homes called Wolf Ranch outside of Austin. And
North or south?
it's south of Austin.
Okay.
And we think that that these ideas now that will be discussed, I'm sure, in Los Angeles is where do we build, how do we build, and the materiality, of course. I've also seen the latest kind of they, of course, are easing the build back regulations, so they don't have to hit the stringent all electric requirement that exists right now in the building code.
In Texas?
No, in Los Angeles.
Oh, in Los Angeles.
So
okay.
they're easing on a few things so that the speed of rebuilding can actually proceed faster. The CEQA and environmental review would take generally 9 to 12 months. That also is going to be reduced. So there is an opportunity, I think, in just as we were in the same situation after Sandy, of thinking about where to build and how to build that exists in Los Angeles. So Icon is in that sense very interesting. And then of course, also with the idea of actually working with NASA and possibly doing something on the moon. And I often hear from people, why on earth would you be trying to build on the moon? Why not use those same resources monetarily or the thinking and do things here? And I basically, in a way, defend this work by saying that on the moon, you would need to create a circular system for everything, and it cannot fail. One minor puncture or one minor failure basically takes everything away. So if one is able to create that circular system on the moon, then that is the guinea pig, and that is the beta test for everything here. So you can literally then take those technologies, and I think they could just be accelerated by the harshness of the conditions.
Okay. I don't have anything to follow up with that question. Okay. One more question, and then we will, because, you know, I think they would always ask a woman this question. How do you balance family, work, and travel?
All right.
Yeah, we like your outfit, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I've never been asked that. No. So I would say that I'm a late arrival dad. I'm in my mid-50s. I have a son that's 3, a daughter that's 5 going on 12. And she, you know, I would say that I've in a way done the heavy kind of efforts of creating or starting a career without having to balance with the family. I think it's a much tougher thing as you're starting and developing a career and the family at the same time. That's a lot of balancing. Mm-hmm. I'm in a position where I can literally take off or also redistribute what and where I would like to spend time. And I think that's, of course, a privilege, but also one that I take it's very important for me to be in the life of my kids and see them grow. So, and I've arranged the life that I lead to basically be, my commute from home to work is 2 minutes. So I live on 70 Washington and I work in 55 Washington.
Oh, wow.
Or 45 Main, but it's got an entrance. So for me, and that choice of living a low commute sort of lifestyle, that I have done from my school. I lived in LA for 2 years with no car. I had a bike, and I did everything on my bike, and that just made me always make certain decisions to, spend the time where I wanted it to spend it. So that's how I do it at this point.
So you travel less?
If I travel, sometimes I will take the family with me,
Mm-hmm.
and then I also have a commitment of not traveling too much or taking a time out and being at home for longer parts. But within my work, there is a lot of travel. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm going to have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay.
Yeah.
What year did you cut the ponytail?
Oh, right. I've gone through a lot of different hair lengths and beards and no beards. So I think I cut it when I moved to Seattle. I don't know. Did you guys see where I had it in Sweden at the glassblowing school, and then I didn't have it at Chihuly's. So when I came to Seattle and I started working at Chihuly Studio, I cut it.
Somewhere along that.
Yeah.
So maybe it wouldn't catch fire.
Yeah, no, I don't remember the exact reasoning. I did do this when I was traveling for that year, and there were stories of backpackers getting mugged, and I felt that if I was in Russia, and it was kind of sketchy. I was in Siberia, so I went to a flea market and I purchased, at that time, it was an Adidas takeoff called Abibas. And so I wore this Abibas outfit, and I grew a big, bushy Russian kind of beard, and I learned to say a few words in Russian if people started talking to me. And that got me through Siberia, Murmansk, Archangel, and some of the crazy places up there.
Okay, we now have an actual microphone.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi, Guy. Pleasure to be here. I have a question. You do business development all over the world, and it's well documented. You're very authentic. Authenticity might not be the same when you are dealing with the Prime Minister of, Japan, or someone in Azerbaijan or a billionaire somewhere else. How do you do to, have that thing in common with everyone you talk to and you do business with? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I think that's a pretty good question. There are assholes at every level. And I would say, go out of the way of the assholes. And there are very good people at every socioeconomic level as well. And I feel that any interview that you have as an architect designer, it's a two-way interview, right? It's not only them interviewing you, it's you need to ask questions and interview them, because you're about to get into a relationship that might be longer than your marriage. And you want to know who that person is. I think oftentimes there's a loss of sight of that kind of vetting, and that's where you can sometimes lose the very qualities that you should also be looking for in the relationship, the working relationship. But yeah.
Hi, you made your apprenticeships in, the various countries you lived in sound very planned.
They
Was
they
the
sound very what?
narrative very planned?
Yeah.
It sounded like you had followed a progression. You had
Right.
planned, that you would really like the art, the glass work that you did, and
Yeah.
that led directly to working at Chihuli's. Was it actually planned, or is that a narrative that makes sense now but
Yeah.
didn't exist back then?
I realize that when I show an overview and a listing of the countries, it looks planned. But I can assure you, the only thing I had planned when I left university at UCLA was I was going to live with my grandmother, who was 93 years old, in Germany, and I would look for a job in her town, which was Einbeck. And I wanted to work in one of the fields of architecture, or one of the materials, and that was wood, carpentry, because the town is all about wood. So that was the first gig. The second was there was a friend of mine that had just become a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali, and asked for me to come down and visit. So I was like, sure. I earned some money. I took the ferries and planes and got down to Mali, and then hooked up with the local chief architect, not a chief builder or chieftain, who said, "Oh, we're about to do our rebuilding of all the structures." The cool thing there is that this was a small town of maybe, I would say 1,000 people, and they twice a year band together, and then for like literally 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they just go around as a group, and then they hear, someone says, "Oh, we just had a baby. We need another room on our home," or someone says the mosque is falling apart and we need to rebuild this wall. They just list all of the things that need to be done in the town, and then they, as a group, go and do everything. So that it takes a village kind of concept. And I was allowed to come in there and just make bricks and build walls and surface them. So then I had connections with a professor that was teaching at SciArc in Switzerland, and he said he needed a TA. So I ended up at Vico Morcote after leaving Africa, and started teaching there. So everything was just the next thing. I never knew what the next thing was. I just knew I wanted to do something else than what I had just done. And
It seems to me you follow your curiosity.
Yeah.
And are a little bit of a hippie kind of wanderer. Do you think you were kind of a hippie in the beginning?
I had the choice between UCLA and Berkeley, and I chose UCLA. I think it's because Berkeley would have, that was the safer choice, because, yeah, there's some hippie qualities to Berkeley, and
Yeah.
maybe I was thinking, you know,
Oh, that might have.
that I thought LA would take me out of my comfort zone, and I was really intrigued by the Jet Propulsion Lab, the movie industry, the Chicano culture. I was like, there were so many more like things that could influence the development, and I had no idea. You know, I had never lived in a place that large or grand, but it opened, like the West Coast just is different, and it opens your mind to so many things.
Oh, hi, Kai. I thought it was interesting when you brought up the book, Postmodern Geographies. I was wondering if you could talk more about your kind of design philosophy when it comes to master planning or urban design, whether it's borrowing from Ed Soja or
Yep.
if there are other influences.
So, postmodern geographies is the idea that also it uses LA as a kind of litmus test, and it's just telling you about the rapid kind of prototyping that was happening in LA, right? It was initially just ranches, then it was groves of orange trees, and then it was like single family developments, and then it was, you know, became freeway metropolis. So it within a short period of time of 60 to 80 years had like 5 to 6 layers all on top of one another. And I think that that rapid prototyping is certainly something that one can learn from, because there are so many cities around the world and urban areas that are growing at that pace or faster. So kind of learning to appreciate the things you keep, the things that you can iterate. I think permanence is a big thing. So people make things that are impermanent in Los Angeles, whereas Europe makes things that are permanent, right? So you build a house and you live in it for 600 years. And in LA, you build something and you might use it for 20 years and then you discard it. So it's about those various different like sensibilities of space and of time. So I think that does influence the work. I think Super Keelan is a great example of almost a little bit of a postmodern idea of a park that is, you know, both historic in its cultural kind of adaptation, but also forward, very futuristic in that it's like a Blade Runner-esque, bringing together all the cultures into one very dense place, so that you can in a way communicate across age groups and across people. Yeah, this guy. Sorry, sir. Yeah.
After 47 years of teaching at Penn Institute School of Architecture, my students and I used to see your work as structural innovation. But how do you feel now about the sea rise that's being projected around, particularly the impact on the United States? And what would you perhaps know about it?
Yeah. I mean, coming from Denmark, it's a tiny little country. It has 1,000 islands. Many of which are going to basically be submerged underwater. So it is very acute coming with and from Scandinavia and from Denmark. And I think that's one of the reasons that we were given the chance. You know, we were newbies here in New York, but we still came with this kind of like coastal kind of knowledge. And you know, it's also why the Dutch are so involved in all of the coastal remediation work. And so my feeling is that there's the Dutch model, which means that you live with those water issues and you build the dikes and you basically live under the water table. And you're at peace with that, right? But it means that you have to be very strict and very kind of rigorous in your approach. And the other one is to basically migrate and move. I think it will be both. in the United States. I think there will be areas like Manhattan that we will protect and we will keep, like a Dutch model. And then there will be other areas, maybe like Miami Beach, where it just makes no sense because the water is not only coming from the beach, it's also coming from the ground through the high tides and the king tides. So it'll be a bit of both.
Hi. In your interview with Chihui, you mentioned the importance of curiosity as a trait. Do you feel like curiosity is something that's inherent to a person, or do you think it's something that can be cultivated? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, also if you teach, right, it's kind of hard sometimes to create curiosity because there are some students that are innately curious and others that just are, they want you to tell them what to do. And so I think you have to figure out like how you find your way with the kind of qualities that you have. But if your question is, can you cultivate curiosity at later stages? I'm hopeful that you could. I always do this.
I'm not sure.
No, but I always do this because I had a history professor at UVA. I don't know why I'm going to tell you all of this, but he lived with his mom. He was 39 years old at the time. And he was, and the reason that I say about the mom, you'll find out in a second, he would basically give you pop quizzes. And he gave you a reading list at the beginning of the semester, and he said, read this book by week 3. End of week 3, pop quiz, 10 questions. First question is, when was the book published? Second question is, who's the publisher? Third question, what was the typeface used, right? And then you would have to write, you'd have to answer the questions and then write a little bit of an essay. He was such a stickler for spelling. His mom, who was an English teacher, did all of the grammatical, and you would lose 10 points for any grammatical errors that his mom found in your paper. So you would get back an F almost every time because you screwed up and didn't know the typeface, or you had 2 or 3 spelling errors or wrong punctuation. What he tried to teach you, which I think I still take to me this day, he said, if you don't know who the publisher is, you don't know the point of view that the book is written in. Because it's all about, the King James Bible is the King James version of what happened, right? And it's genius because he wanted you to realize when was it published? Because the year it was published tells you the kind of political situation that it was published in, right? And a book published today is different than a book that was published in the 1960s. So he then, and we were like all like, well, you know, if you had just told us to look at those pages. But he said, I bet you, if you took your LP collection, back then we had records, and he goes, I bet you, when you buy an LP, you spend 2 hours looking at every aspect of that LP. You know how long the song is. You know who the recording, you might even know where it was recorded. And he goes, I want you to know the liner notes of what you're reading in my class the same way you know about, you know, the Led Zeppelin album. And that was genius, right? That was genius, because if we put that curiosity into what we were reading, then we can read better what the content is.
That's really interesting.
So we have one more question.
2 more, him and then him. He's been raising his hand a long time.
Yeah, first of all, I'm quite grateful that you started off this conversation talking about like the business side of architecture, because architects kind of have a reputation for not necessarily being very good at it. I'm kind of curious because big actually kind of implies ideas about growth and scalability, and you know, when I sort of look at your biography, I can kind of see that. I'm curious, one, in which ways does like big, is that part of Big's culture? You know, these sort of ideas about business and economics, so to speak. And the second part is, you know, I think the vast majority of architecture firms in the United States are actually, on the smaller side as opposed to big. And I'm just kind of curious, what lessons do you think, small firms, 10 persons or less, can actually take from, from sort of your story?
Yep. So I'll answer both. I think what Bjarke accomplished, and I'll start with the small office, right? When I started at Big, it was about 25 people. It had been Plot, right? And Plot was, I think, grew to about 40 people. And the year that I started working with Bjarke and Big was the year that Plot dissolved. And Bjarke and Julien had parted ways. So 25 or so people went with Bjarke, and about 10 or 15 people went with Julien. They started 2 incredible offices. But with Bjarke, what my experience is that he is someone that is very interested in, let's say, your skill sets or your interests, and in a way wants to empower those, wants you to find your path within, let's say, Bigdom or what he had created in the office. So we were still quite small, 25 people, and we never said what we couldn't do. We only spoke in terms of what we could do. And what you also find out is that you're in this industry where, if you haven't done it 10 times before, why would I ever give you the trust to do it the first time? But we're working sometimes with clients that are failing and beta testing and putting out weird things that are, that are continuously developing and iterating. So what you just have to do is kind of flip the narrative to say, I'm like you, right? If you're in the tech industry and you're producing a product that is not fully fleshed out and you're putting it out there to allow everyone else to beta test it and make it good, I'm working with you the same way. I'm gonna have you help us beta test what it is that your needs are. And I think it's both finding ways for people that you want to work with or that you aspire to work with to understand what you do in their language, rather than trying to get them to understand our language or architectural language. So when you can present the very ideas and values that you have and what the processes that you're going to be doing, that is, I think, how we work. And I don't think none of us talk about business of architecture. So it's really about what do we trying to achieve? What are the ways of getting there? And then, it's all a creative process. What I do is a creative process. What the lawyers do in setting up the contracts is a creative process. And so for us, it's the creative process to get there. And then hopefully I answered the question about the smaller. I think that you don't have to be big. Scale is not that important. You should find what is comfortable for you, either as a staff and an employee, or as a entrepreneur and someone that is trying to start a business.
I have a question about your transition from Europe to Georgia. You used the term twice, hightail it. Did you watch cowboy movies as a kid in Georgia?
I use the words "fixin' to," and I could very quickly start talking Southern. And I'm back in LaGrange all the time. I was teaching actually in Atlanta not too long ago, and for me it's just that drawl. It's kind of life just takes a much slower speed when you're down there, and it's.
Be careful, you're talking about my people.
All right, that's kind of interesting.
So.
But you know what, I have to say, we've done this forever, and what's really interesting is most people don't talk about their use. Most people say I worked for Richard Meyer. I did something that was transformative for me, and then I'm going to take those ideas and somehow I did a major building. What's really interesting, you talked about really what your life was before you got into it and how you got there, and I think nobody's done that before, and it's not a bad idea. And I think we should try and do it more. I'd like to get everybody who wants to help our colleagues in LA. I don't even know if I addressed it properly, but give us your emails and let us know. We'll try to figure out whatever it is we're doing, which of course we have no idea what it is, but you'll help. And together we're going to get them facing the future in a good way.
One question. How many languages do you speak?
I try to speak 3 languages. So yeah,
That helps.
Danish was one that I learned along the way.